Hiyo Dagayo, let's talk about Cyberfrog, Warts and All, the complete 90s edition by Ethan Van Sciver. Okay, so this is his work on Cyberfrog when he was with Harris Comics in the 90s. And really, as I look at this thing, it is about one of the most 90s comics you could run across. But there's also kind of some surprising elements in it as well. This comic, this thing it's an outlaw comic, and if it's not outlaw, it's certainly got roots in that. We'll look through and see if we can find some. It has a lot of the, well, he goes here from, we'll start flipping through a little bit. So he goes from very black and white stuff in these early issues when he's first getting picked up, and then eventually you see he starts to get into color. And his really, he's really coming into his own and selling a lot of books and getting better and better. And then it's the 90s comic book boom, so he's really pushing a lot of units. And then everything falls apart towards the end of the book. Harris stops coloring his comics, and it goes back to black and white. And so there's a handful of really interesting things in here. One is, my videos, I try to do stuff where I look at an artist and say, what can you take away from this guy that, some trick, or, not trick, but, just some method. What is he doing that you could take away to get better? And man, it is really tough for me to find that, because this guy, I look at him, I think something like Virtuoso. It's just like, even his early stuff, you could tell that it's not completely as tight as some of his stuff in the end here, but it's still pretty dang good. And it's like, you see a Virtuoso go from really a virtuoso to even more of one. He he's self-deprecating in here, where he's saying, a little bit like a high school haircut, a little bit ashamed of it, but even the stuff that he's not as proud of or is self-conscious about, still really, really great stuff. And so that's what I guess one of the takeaways, because this is part of the video series, like, what can how do you get better? Well, if a guy like that can go from one point of goodness to even more, yeah. I mean, my brain is just swimming. That's one of the things with this comic that is pretty great. Is I'll go to some page where he has just absolutely filled everything up, and my brain swims, and it's just like it's almost like sensory overload, especially like the black and white stuff towards the end. His black and white stuff, that's that outlaw quality. So if you think about outlaw comics, violence, black and white a lot of times, but then there's something about the outlaw guys is they don't like to have any white left on the page, and they absolutely have to fill in every nook and cranny, and there is definitely that in here. And so the other thing that he doesn't have, which I kind of appeals to my sensibilities, although he draws a pretty pretty lady, the sex isn't in here, at least overtly, like it is in some of the outlaw stuff. That's a big hallmark of outlaw, like gratuitous sex, violence, like super gore violence, and black and white filling up the page. And so we're looking through this, and just really great layouts, really dynamic, really good stuff on every page. And what I'll do, I got a couple of these vertical marks here, and you could see by all the hashes I have around here, bookmarks, this is one of my favorite books. I look at it all the time, and to me, this panel is kind of the most 90s thing ever. I mean, he has taken an aesthetic, and he's made it his own, and really pushed it. The whole double page here, I love the close up, this big toothy grin. Arn, I mean, it just like, that's a smart ass. That's who that is. That's what that face is. And so you come over here, a great contrast, and then I have some minimalistic sensibilities, and I love just that it's a quip. He just barely has his mouth open, just boop, just a little quip, and there's a handful of times where he does a really good contrast of it. And then also he says, when he made Cyberfrog come up with it, there's three guys that he wanted to put into one character. I can't remember the other two, but one of them is Spider-Man, which I love. One of my favorite things about Spider-Man, and a good, if you're somebody who's trying to get good at anatomy and everything, these gross body movements, huge, like, legs, all over the place, arms. I mean, just these huge body motor things that are going on. So yeah, this is one of my favorite spreads in the whole book. It's the color side, but it's really amazing, really close up fingers, and also he's got these chrome shoulder pad things. I I just have to, he's probably never going to see this video, but if he does, I'm like, man, what are you doing to yourself, buddy? Reflections are, drawing is difficult enough as it is. You're just going to make yourself draw reflections in every panel. Hats off to you, man. And before we kind of push on from this panel here of this double page 90s thing, this is the most 90s of the 90s. There's something in the aesthetic with the fingerprints and DNA that is a 90s fingerprint. And it has something to do with the shading, the face, how the face is built, but also the ink line where it's kind of broken up a little bit. It's not perfect, and you can see on the contour of the side of her face where the ink, it's not a full line. There's something about that where it just feels, it just very much appeals to my sensibilities. And so that's what this whole book is. And yeah, there's a couple different phases of it. So you definitely have the outlaw stuff, you have the fun stuff, and then at the end you have more of the outlaw stuff where he's really kind of turned into a virtuoso on top of what he was already doing. And the other part of this is, let's see if I can find one, because genius me, I didn't mark it down. Okay. Oh, this is great here. So we have these chapter breaks where he's filling you in on where he is with everything. And also, okay, so part of the reason why I like some of the 90s guys who were kids in the 90s, because I was a kid in the 90s, and I listen to these guys, and we're speaking the same language. I don't have to watch my comic book channel with some 19-year-old kid who's vibing and yeeting all over the place, whatever that means. And I see this, and of course, like everybody, devastated at Kurt Cobain. So he has a cover here, kind of gory, but it's a dedication to that guy. So yeah, yep. This is just definitely up my alley. This is one of those things. I talk about things that make me happy. This book makes me happy. Again, I talk about in some of my other deals where I missed out on some of the 90s stuff because I grew up so far out in the sticks. So it's just been double fun to kind of catch up on it, because this is all brand new and fresh to me, and I love it. And so we're kind of getting on in time here, so let's end on some deal here to, oh yeah, well, I went to the page and got I gave myself a rabbit trail, forgot what I was talking about. The whole point of that is he has these chapter breaks where he talks about where he was at the particular time that some book or trade or anything came out, because he talks about, getting picked up, doing all the road work and conventions, and then almost having a toy deal, and the guy who was working with the toy deal gets fired. The comic boom falls apart, and then towards the end here, they take the color out of his comics, and then he just eventually has to go get picked up at DC. And this is great. This is, other than the other page there, one of my favorite double page spreads of the whole book. I love this face here. This is great. The roundness of the top of his brow, on the corners of his eyes here, the depth going in, and then of course the point is here and foreshortening on there. And That is really an amazing image. And then over here, this is the thing that I talk about when I'm looking at his stuff, the overwhelming aspect of it. It's just so over the top. My goodness. But it's kind of inspiring because where I'm at in my artist journey is I'm a minimalist. I like to tell the story with as few lines as possible, but sometimes that's kind of a cop out for maybe skimping on your backgrounds, or not taking a break on stuff. I mean, maybe being a little hard on myself, but I don't think I'm ever going to be at this level, but it's still a good thing to think about, where intentionality with what you're doing. Fill up your page. Are you leaving stuff out on purpose because you don't want to do it? You got to keep the story moving along. But again, it's just this very outlaw feel with everything. And so kind of wrapping up here, what do we take away from this? Well, you look at a guy like EVS, who obviously a virtuoso, or those qualities. There is definitely an improvement from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, although I love the beginning just as much as the end, even though I'm sure, again, like I said before, it's kind of a high school haircut. Still pretty amazing stuff. So that's the thing. Keep working on your craft to get better. And also, make yourself fill up the page, man. It's something that I've been messing with. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. Again, that is bananas, man. Bananas. And so yeah, until next time, fill up the page wherever you're at, get better.